So I want to go ahead and jump in. We have over 500 people so far, and I'm excited for everyone who's here because they're having the honor that I'm having, which is to talk to Bishop William Barber. A few points about him: he's president and senior lecturer of repairs of the breach, a Yale University professor, and founding director of the Center for Public Theology and Public Policy at the Yale Divinity School, co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, I believe also founding director of it, author of 5 books, a key voice in the No Kings protests of what already feels like a lifetime ago from more than a week ago. And that's already a lot, but I have a lot to ask you about in this sort of deeply troubling and turbulent time in a country that's witnessing a hostile authoritarian regime that's dismantling our government, flouting our laws and constitution, and seeking to destroy the foundations of our democracy. I think that's where we are. I want to dig in with all of that with you, but I think we ought to start by talking about Trump's unilateral decision to bomb Iran. You said in your latest Substack, Donald Trump has dragged the United States into another unnecessary war because his America first agenda is failing at home. And you noted that Trump said he would be a peace president. It was all lies. So,
Yeah.
what does the decision to go to war with Iran tell you?
Well, all over and over again, he said he would be peace. He would handle things in the first day, the first week, even before he got in office. But we knew he was lying. Trump is a small man using big bombs to try
Yeah,
to justify his failure. And he's gone to war now because authoritarians are at their worst when their policies are failing and people are not following them. And the emperor has been found, to be without clothes underneath. And so people have picked his whole card. His base is pulling back from him. He hasn't done the economic things he said he was going to do. So he uses this attempt to, bomb a country, risk war, and it's dangerous. It's dangerous to all of us. He used to say that Biden would be the cause of World War III, but he
here
is
we
the
are.
cause of the escalation of war, 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 war. And at the back of it, there's a scripture in the Bible that says, "The love of money
Mm,
is the root of all evil." And if you look at Trump, what you see is a narcissist, a neo-fascist who loves money. I was talking to a friend of mine who's a multi millionaire who's very conscientious. And he said, this is the difference between Trump when it comes to his resources. He has in his mind that you are what you own, like
mm,
the masters, like people who are oligarchs. You are, your value is in what you own. Your greatness is in what you own. So that's why he likes to put his name on buildings he doesn't own, but it looks like he owns them. Or
yeah,
he talks owning another country or things of that nature. But conscientious folk believe you are what you can help others become,
yeah,
what you help others produce. So for him, cutting money from healthcare uh, so he can give money to the greedy fits his immoral thinking pattern. Bombing and showing, he had the nerve the other day to say this. And it was so troubling. I wanted to grab every child I could and just hold them up that he said this.
mm,
Nobody else could do what America just did with these bombs.
yeah. What an accomplishment.
Yeah, now give peace a chance. So he gets some kind of thrill
Yeah,
out of being able to drop bunker busting bombs, risk war around the world, and then says now is the time for peace. It's really insanity if you think
yeah,
about it. It's a form of insanity. But what's worse, if there is a worse than what he has done, is the quietness of the Congress
mm,
and of his own party that have refused to speak out against it. And we must say to Democrats, if you ever get power again, even if you have a Democratic president, you too must use your authority to keep us out of war and remind presidents that the Congress only can take us into war. I remember when everybody beat up on Barbara out of Los Angeles. Um, she used to be in the House of Representatives,
Barbara Lee.
Robert Lee, when the
Yeah.
Iran, and she stood her ground, and she was found to be justified. Now she's
Mm.
in Oakland. But at the end of the day, what she was doing was what a representative, a congressperson, a senator is supposed to do. You cannot turn over this kind of power to any person. I don't care whether they're a Democrat, an authoritarian, a Republican, a MAGA, or whoever they are, because it's too much power in the hand of one person.
So we thought that we had separation of powers. We thought we had a functioning constitution and a Congress that would take responsibility for, you know, informing, advising, and consenting when it comes to deciding on who should be our cabinet members. We thought that there would be people sort of in positions of leadership. And I'm particularly now I'm almost putting aside all of the Republicans at this
Sure,
point
sure.
among the Democrats who have failed to, I think, grasp the urgency of this moment. And I'm surprised that there's so many that still seem to think that they can somehow operate with business as usual mentality. Are you surprised by that? And I know I want to get to sort of
Well,
the issue around mass protests, but I want to stick there for a second.
well, I'm more hurt than surprised. It's been going on a long time. One of the
Mhm.
things that bothered us deeply, is when you look at votes in the Congress. I don't know how many people pay attention to this. Why is it that we always have bipartisanism when it comes to raising the amount of money going to the military, but we can't get bipartisanism on healthcare or
Yeah,
raise wage? And that even before what Trump is trying to do now, and Johnson and MAGA, the Congress is trying to do now with the budget to take it to over $1.1 trillion. Even before that, uh, I remember when there was votes, even under Biden, there were votes in the Congress to raise the war, what we call the war economy, the military budget, to where it controls a large percentage of the non-discretionary, discretionary spending. But that same year, 8 Democrats joined all the Republicans to block living wages. And I stepped back for a second with friends of mine and said, wait a minute. Those same Democrats voted with Republicans to increase the war economy and the war machinery. But when they had a chance,
yeah,
raise the living wage, a minimum wage to a living wage that we have not raised since 2009, they went the other way. This, again, it goes back to the love of money. And I
mm,
often go back
mm,
to the quote that Eisenhower made when he was leaving. He said that we have to be aware of the what did he call it? He called it the congressional military
the military-industrial complex.
industrial. But he said congressional, and his writers made him take that out
Mm,
to
mm,
say military industrial complex. But the wisdom he had as a
yeah,
general was, he said, the congressional military, because when they vote on that defense budget, all of them are looking at how much money is coming in their.
right. Right, and this again, it seems to be focus on how the military serves local, their local communities without thinking about the well-being of the people who live in those
Well,
communities.
the bottom line is, if you can blow the world up 100 times, why
Mm.
you keep adding to it? I mean, one
How
time
many more times? So,
enough.
so let
You
me,
know,
what I want to get to, so I'm going to,
I say one more thing on that.
sure, please.
It was Dr. King who said three things: war, poverty, and racism were the triune evils, right? And he said any nation that, where every budgetary decision ultimately comes down to the spending on the military, is in a spiral downward. Today, what we've said repairs the breach in our movement is that there are 5 interlocking injustices that challenge us today: systemic racism, and that's racism toward Black, Native people, Indigenous people, Latino; systemic poverty; ecological devastation and the denial of health care; the war economy and the militarization of our community; and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism.
Mhm.
Those 5 interlocking injustices
Yeah,
require now for us to have an intersectional fusion movement to challenge them for the not just for the sake of a party, but we are in a crisis of civilization itself.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, I'm thinking about what you said in terms of your own Substack, or our moral moment that describes, and I want to read it because I think it's good. Every age must have a movement of people who will build a moral fusion mass movement that stands together, because the issues before us are not left versus right or Republicans versus Democrat. They're moral versus immoral, right versus wrong, justice versus injustice. And I have to say, since 2017, I've increasingly come to realize, like, I can't just sort of, chronicle what's going on as a journalist. I felt more and more I had to say what's right from wrong, what's true from false, what's normal from crazy and absolutely dangerous. So I'm curious, sort of in the evolution, as people have seen this kind of cascade of violations and indignities over the last 5 months. Do you think most people are beginning to grasp, the moral dilemma of this moment?
Well, when I say moral, I wanted to
Mm.
define what we're saying is
Yeah,
you have to examine what's going on based on our deepest moral uh, beliefs of our constitutional and founding documents and our deepest religious values. So you're talking about establishing justice, providing for the common defense, promoting the general welfare, ensuring domestic tranquility and equal protection under the law, or you're talking about truth, justice, mercy, and love from a religious standpoint. When you take those precepts and sit them on top of the policies today, we are failing bad. There's nothing that these policies are not establishing justice. They're surely not rooted in love and truth and
yeah,
grace,
to say
and
the least.
are not promoting the general welfare. If anything, they're promoting the general destruction. When a country is going through this, you have to have somebodies, always, and you look at it through the lens of history. There has to be a remnant of people of all different races, colors, creeds, incomes, geographies, who stand up and say, I'm not here as a Democrat or Republican. I'm here as a moral agent. And I can't be silent, because to be silent would literally be to waste my time in this earth and to abdicate my responsibility or our responsibility.
Yeah,
When you look at what has gone on, not just in the last 5 months, but the first term of Trump, and then
right.
now
And the escalation in this.
escalation, right? Because he got less votes. When you look at the fact that less people voted in the last, I can't even. It's been hard to get my head around that. The people stayed back. When we look at the fact
You had,
that
can I
had a
just
go ahead,
project? You had 89 million people that chose not to vote.
those not
People eligible voters. And then you had over 77 million people who chose to vote for Trump despite all that was knowable about this guy.
and you had 30 million poor and low wage people who didn't vote because nobody talked to them. Literally, and a campaign talking about the wealthy and the middle class, and didn't even speak to the 87 million people who are poor and low wage, and to low wage workers. Which means you leave out whole swaths of people, regardless of their color and their creed. But when you see this, I think we're in, as I said, not just a crisis of democracy, but a crisis of civilization.
Mhm.
Uh, I truly believe it, and many others believe, that we are in the throes of whether or not we're going to have a third Reconstruction in in this country, to finish what was not finished in the first two. The first
Yeah,
one was 1800s after slavery. The second one was the civil rights movement and peace movement. But
yeah,
both of the movements were undermined by violence and destruction.
yeah,
But here's again, I want to go back to this. The mythology that's operating now, where people, for money's sake and tax breaks to the wealthiest, are willing to sell out the future of this country and willing to put in place policies that aren't just bad, but deadly. And this is why it makes it even more a moral issue. Do you know this current budget that they're talking about passing? Yale and University of Pennsylvania did a death analysis,
Mm.
and 51,000 people will die needlessly.
Yeah.
Right as we're on this phone today, 800 people are dying a day from poverty, a quarter million a year, poverty and low wages. Now imagine when we got to 500 people dying a day from COVID, we said it was an epidemic.
Yeah.
But when we look at the number of people that are dying from poverty and low wages, that's provable, and you can footnote it, it's not an outcry. That means our moral sensitivities have got to be awakened
Yeah.
in this, which is why clergy are now, we're doing Moral Monday in DC,
Yeah.
and impacted people are going up on Mondays. We're going back on June the 30th. I hope many of your listeners will join us. But we're going in full vestments. Why? And we're praying, and they're arresting us in the rotunda for
Mm.
praying. And
Mm.
somebody, why are you doing that? Because what we're trying to say by going in full religious vestments with impacted people, some who will die if these policies pass, is that this is not for us a political, just a seasonal battle. It's a moral battle. It's a lifetime battle. It's a struggle we have to engage. And I said in 2016 at the Democratic Convention, they asked me to, by the way, to do a speech on morality. I did not. I said twice I wasn't going to do it because it was partisan. And then
Mm.
I got some people and we agreed to do it. Um, and I said then we need moral defibrillators.
Mm.
Well, once again,
Oh boy, we need moral defibrillators
that's that's
because
right,
there's going to be an awful lot of people that are at this point flatlining.
and that's right, flatline, and that we would shock the nation hard again, and we would because there's so much effort to harden the hardened nation. But I'm gonna tell you, when I look at what is happening, the escalation,
Yeah.
I'm not so sure if we need moral defibrillators or we need a heart transplant.
Yeah.
That something is just terribly, terribly wrong. And I keep finding myself in the Declaration of Independence, that section where it says, when there's been a long train of abuses,
Mm.
it is the duty and the requirement of the people to throw off that government, to
Yeah.
and to put in place something new. And I'm not talking about ending democracy, but they say the Declaration of Independence imagined that there are times you have to fully shift what is going on and get back to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness as fundamental drivers of why we do what we do. And I know the people that wrote it were imperfect, but that section of the Declaration of Independence
Yeah.
to me today, we can't continue like this.
So I think that this notion of citizenship and the responsibilities that go along with that, I think there's a lot of resetting and rethinking that needs to go on because we're dealing with an awful lot of people who thought that it was enough to be spectators, right? It was enough to sort of stand silently by and watch other people and maybe count on their elected Democrats or their elected officials, the courts, whoever is going to come along and save them. And I think that's why surely I have, and I think you have as well, recognized the centrality of mass protest as the necessary way to begin to and meaningfully drive change. And so I'm curious. I mean, you talked at the opening of the No Kings protest. I think the words were, and I've written it down. Your words were. That it was your faith calls you to embrace love and rebuke hate and to rebuke fear and death, which sounds right, and it sounds like more than a full-time job. Do we have the ability, given all that you've seen, given Trump's sort of demagogic
Mhm.
display playbook to stoke fear and hate? Do we have the capacity to overcome that?
Well, I certainly believe so. First of all, I say this and I want your people to hear it. Don't get mad when you hear what I'm saying first. Just think about it. This is
Please.
not the worst we have seen. I mean,
Mm.
we have people in this
Yeah.
country who had to come through slavery, had to come through the Trail of Tears, had to come through the tyranny from England and place. So we have to remember in history there have been worse moments. Now this could
Yeah.
become the if we don't stop it. Secondly, when we look at the actual data, 7,000 votes, that's all, was the difference between the House of Representatives being in the hands of who's in the hand of 7,000.
Mm.
When I look at the so-called battleground states, if just 10% of poor and low wage voters, for instance, that didn't vote were to be mobilized around the agenda and had voted, it would change. It would change the outcome of all of those elections. All of those states. It's not a heavy lift, but what has to happen is people have to decide, I can't be a spectator.
Yeah.
So stop this. Yes. Why? Because as Jane Baldwin said, whatever we're seeing now, human beings have done it, not some God that's you can't control. uh, Everything Trump is doing grew out of the Southern strategy movement of the late
Yep.
19th and has just blossomed. They actually said in that movement that they wanted to create positive polarization. Dr. King in 1965 said at the end of the Selma to Montgomery March that the greatest fear of the greedy oligarchs in this country was for the masses of black people and poor whites and Latinos to join together and labor to form a voting bloc that could fundamentally shift the economic architecture of the country. So if that's their fear, we ought to realize their fear. We ought to
Yeah.
act.
Yeah.
So we have the capacity if we will engage in the work and if we will have moral imagination. I don't think we can do it just with partisanism. And then
Yeah.
thirdly, Democrats, for instance, have got to understand that part of the apathy is, uh, as I said earlier, when Biden and Kamala Harris ran together, they were in the South, in Georgia, talking about living wages and voting rights. When they took over and they had both the House and the Senate, the legislators backed up on both of those things.
Mm.
They didn't get the John Lewis bill done and they didn't do living wages. People get discouraged.
Yeah.
So one of the things in a negative way you have to at least say about Trump and the technocrats and MAGA is whether you like it or not, they do what they say they're going to do.
Yeah.
As oh,
Viciously, cruelly,
right,
without care about the consequences
right,
for people, but they do
right.
what they
And
do.
you remember Dr. King and others have said the issue so much is not what bad people do, it's the silence and the inaction of good people. So
Yeah.
running for office now needs to be clear. I think they need to lay out what they're going to do clearly and then do it because people have to have their concerns restored. They feel as though they get lied to. And then lastly, there's a book out here called The Purchasing of the American Pulpit by a scholar from Princeton, and he talks about how extremists decided during the Roosevelt years that they would literally purchase the American pulpit. They were afraid of the social gospel, Rauschenbusch and people of
Yeah.
that, and that were saying that greed was wrong and not having labor rights was sinful and not having child labor laws was sinful, and they fought to put those things in place from a moral perspective. Well, they did purchase a lot of those pulpits, but my point is that this is the time. Extremist, religious, nationalists, their numbers are actually going down.
Yeah.
A lot of the young folk are leaving them.
Despite you're saying, despite the fact that Trump has successfully exploited, surely the event
Right.
sort of
But
more.
but they have reached a ceiling of growth and
Yeah.
more people. So what I'm arguing is that there is this place. The greatest potential expansion of the voting bloc in this country is
Yeah.
among poor and low wage people. And if moral leaders of more progressive religious bodies will stand and not just stay in the pulpit and engage in personal piety, but involve themselves in public theology, which is what we're supposed to be about. Yes, I have hope that
Mm.
we can. Now, optimism is another thing, but I have hope that
Yeah.
we do it. And 26 is going to tell us the story. I mean,
Yeah.
we've
Want to go?
said, we've often said that this is the most important election of our time. Well, 26 really will be. It
Yeah.
really will.
If we in fact can get there. I mean,
That's
17
right.
an awfully long time. And I want to just close at least by giving you sort of a couple of quotes from one of our country's greatest Americans, Frederick Douglass, and 1852. You know,
Mhm.
and is talking about what to the slave is the Fourth of July as we look forward to the Fourth of July, which was a pretty brilliant depiction of the horrors of slavery and the egregious failures and cruelty that's been surely then and has continued to be a part of the American project. But even there, he said, "I do not despair of this country." And so contained within there is this, as you put it, sort of the hopefulness. And I want to just share one more note from Frederick Douglass, 1857, and the fight for the abolition of slavery. And this is where I think that the mass protest becomes so critical. Power concedes, and you know this surely better than I. Power concedes nothing without a demand. It never did, and it never will. Find out just what any people will quietly submit to, and you have found out the exact measure of injustice and wrong which will be imposed upon them.
Let me take two points of that and also add to it. William Lloyd Garrison was a white abolitionist, was put in jail in Boston, in of all places. And he wrote on his jail cell, I, William Lloyd Garrison, was arrested in jail and beaten by a mob for preaching damnable gospel that all men are created equal.
Mm,
And then the person who came up with nonviolence as a theory, as a political action, he wrote about it, and King often quoted him. It says that one day he was asked by his friend, "Why are you in jail?" And he said, "The question is, why aren't you?"
mm,
Considering how bad things are.
mm,
There has never in this country been change to stop extremism that has not included agitation, mobilization, litigation, and legislation. You just won't find it. There's
yeah,
in every era, every generation has its Edmund Pettus Bridge moment.
yeah,
Every generation has its moment that it has to stand up and not say what people did in the past, but say we are the children of those from the past, and this is our moment to stand fight. This fighting for democracy is hard.
yeah,
Let roll down like waters and righteous like a mighty stream is hard work. Now, Douglas in 52 talked about in that speech. He also said that to love the Christianity of Jesus, you must hate the religion of the slave master.
mm,
He, he was very clear,
yeah.
and he
About
said,
the utter hypocrisy.
right, you got to call it damnable hypocrisy. You can't just say, well, it's just two different groups debating. Some things are just wrong. But
Yeah,
he also said this in after the Dred Scott decision was passed by a a a, a selected Supreme Court that was intentionally put there to uphold slavery, and they did exactly what they were put there to do. The story is told that Frederick Douglass and many other abolitionists became very depressed,
mm.
like some of us feel. And Sojourner Truth saw him in Philadelphia with his head in his hands.
What year is this?
This is, I think, it's in 50. The Dred Scott decision was around, it may have been 57. I think 57
Yeah, yeah.
before 1861. And she saw him and she screamed across the room, Frederick, is God dead? That question shook
Mm,
him
mm,
because he knew that every moment you have got to decide who's going to be your God. However you talk about God, are you going to allow this extremism and this lie to be your God, or are you going to allow truth and justice to be? He got up, he made a request to speak before the abolition group 2 months later. He wrote this speech, and everybody ought to read it. I read it every other week
mm,
because the first 30 minutes, he does nothing but talk about how bad it is. He does an analysis. He does what we call a fusion moral analysis. But then he gives an agenda and an answer
yeah,
for mobilization. And this is what he says. He says, it seems as though, and it is so, that everything is against us: the courts, the Congress, the magistrates, the sheriffs, so forth and so on. But as monstrous as this decision is, I receive it now with a cheerful spirit,
Mm.
because I look at this reality of history. Every attempt to ally and stop the abolition movement has only served to intensify and embolden our agitation.
Yeah, yeah,
This moment that we're in right now must serve to intensify and embolden our agitation, because you can count on extremism to do one thing in its pride. You can count on neo-fascism to do it, is they always go too far.
yeah, yeah. Well, and we're seeing that play out in
Yeah,
Cascade
right.
daily,
Yeah. And this
and
us to intensify, because if Frederick and others, white and black, could do it then, the truth is they did more with less. We can't do less with more.
mm, mm, mm.
They
Yeah.
did more. They couldn't get on Substack. They couldn't. I mean, they didn't have Google
Well,
and
Frederick
all.
Douglass had to go from town to town and country to
Exactly.
country, and to make sure his points got through to people.
Exactly. We don't, and the lost, what has brought Trump into office and MAGA into office is not a mandate. It's not overwhelming. You
Right,
can't believe their lies. You have to actually look at the data. For instance, in North Carolina, he'd won by 183,000 votes, but 2.5 million people didn't vote, and over a million poor and low wage people, 900,000 that could have voted didn't vote, and
right.
they didn't register. So what we have to do is figure out not how to not believe the lies, because neo-fascism is always going to try to make you think that it's more powerful than it is. And then we have to figure out Bannon. I'll say this, I know we got to go, but Steve Bannon did a video, and in that video, he told part of their vision. He said they basically told Trump, "Give us 100 days of thunder. Do whatever you want to do with executive orders. Keep the people off kilter. Keep them off balance.
Yeah,
Even though executive orders are not law ultimately." And he said, "And while you're doing that, we want to focus on controlling the $5.5 trillion budget so we can control the $76 trillion of assets. We want to
right.
focus on firing 4,000 specific workers so we can control the 10 million federal workers that they manage." So they've actually laid out their plan. Well,
Yeah. So
if
just
their
so
plan, let's organize against it.
Mm, mm. So look, I'm mindful of your time. I'm grateful for all the people who are here, and the opportunity that they've had, like I've had to hear from you, Bishop Barber. And I just want to say that I couldn't agree with you more. We are at a crucible moment, but there have been other crucible moments in our history, and where people have endured, I think, far worse than what we're now struggling with here. And I think it's important to keep that context to be able to manage the feelings of distress and despair, and the instinct to give up that so many people have. And that's why I'm particularly encouraged by your notion, which I do agree with, that that take this moment and let it motivate you to be more purposeful and to be more engaged with this struggle. If you care enough about democracy and the survival of the democratic experiment and the America itself, then this is our moment, and that should be something that we recognize. It's not a minority of us who think of it. It's the majority that didn't vote for Donald Trump, specifically voted for Kamala Harris, or 89 people who chose not to vote at all. So recognize and remember, we are actually the majority here, and now we just have to actually sort of take the power that exists by our collective recognition of what country it is that we believe in.
And it comes by being honest about
Mm,
some mistakes that have been made. That's why I think Dems need to be honest. Repentance, metanoia, as we call it in Greek, is always the pathway to redemption and resurrection. We
Yeah.
often say in our movement when we go, we're not an insurrection, we're a resurrection. And then sometimes you have to be honored that you're here to battle. In other words, that history or the zeitgeist, the spirit of the
It
time,
goes
has
right.
right. I'll tell you this story to your listeners. You know, I have immune deficiencies, and I was told by my doctor probably if I caught COVID before there was a vaccine, I would make it. And one night I was really wrestling with all the people I know that died, and particularly the 300,000 that died primarily because they didn't have health care, not because of COVID. And I said, I'm no better than those persons. Why am I still here? I was wrestling as a clergy person and as a theologian. And late over in the night, an answer came to me that said, you'll never be able to answer the question, why are you still here? But what you can answer is, what are you going to do since you are still here?
Right.
Because the truth of the matter is, all of us live within 6 minutes. 6 minutes without breath, most of us will be here. But so the question becomes, what are you going to do with your 6 minutes, your 6 hours, your 6 days, your 6 weeks, your 6 months, your 6 years? That's the question.
Yeah.
And it doesn't require all of us. It is always a remnant of people who come together. And that's what's so powerful about these massive gatherings. There's some theories that say if you can get 2 to 3% of a nation to move in sync together, they can.
3.5% better, which is 12 million Americans. Yeah.
That's You can reshift the consciousness. You can reshift the moral imagination, and moral imagination must precede moral implementation.
Yeah.
So, if there's ever been a time to stand up, it's now, because
Yeah.
bowing down cannot be an option. The only way a king becomes a king is you bow. So bowing down can't be an option. And then lastly, telling the truth, because the greatest form of one of the greatest forms of nonviolent fighting is when you tell the truth in the face of the lies.
Yeah.
That's why we've decided on this budget matter that we're going to tell the truth about it. Before we were pushing, people weren't talking about its deadliness and how many people will die. You can't play now. You can't tiptoe around the tulips. I even said to some of the members of Democratic Party, along with other people, you all should start calling yourself the opposition party, not the minority party.
Yeah.
Opposition party. Let's be clear, and then be clear about what you're opposing, and then be clear about what you will do if the people trust you with power again. You
Yeah.
know,
Well,
so that's I think we've missed some opportunities,
yeah.
but that does
You're
not uh, that we have to accept what is and not push for what ought to be. And it's our season right now.
Yeah. Yeah,
Me,
and to remain clear about what it is that we're fighting for, right?
that's
I mean, that helps to make, I think, every day that much more manageable, and provides a kind of clarity, a kind of a light of what it is that we're aiming for. I think that we have it in ourselves, and I couldn't agree with you more about the need for mobilization and litigation and legislation. All of which need to come.
agitated.
And most of all, agitation, as Frederick Douglass would demand of us. So, this is a moment, and I think I not only sort of choose to see it as good fortune that it's in our hands, but I also am grateful that I could hear from you today. So thank you so much, and thanks for everybody who joined us in this conversation today.
And I'm looking for, if you've got 1,000 people out there that will go to www.breachrepairers.org, I hope I'm looking for 1,000 people that'll give $100 a month, uh, just to help us in repairs of the breach, to mobilize and organize, to do the work that has to be done. And if you don't support us, support somebody.
Yeah,
Yeah. And let me tell you two things theologically. Can I be a preacher for 2 minutes and I'm gonna shut up?
sure
All right.
can.
On the day, I was telling my wife this. I kind of mentioned it to her. She just chuckled because I always say I have one more thing to say. But on
There's
that
always one
on
more.
yeah, on that morning in Philadelphia, when I got up, it was raining. And I told her it never rains on a moral movement, so it's gonna eventually stop. But then I thought about it. I said, in Africa, rain is seen as a sign of the heavens baptizing you. And then I thought about how people were so thirsty for hope in that moment. But then what really moved me was the people came in spite of the rain
Yeah.
by the thousands. And when we drove up, the line was just, and I said to her, something's happening in this country. They've gone, there's a place in which you can push people so far that they have no other choice but to stand up.
Yeah.
And I really believe that's the moment that we're in right now. Those people who are saying our democracy is going to have a heart, our civilization is going to care. We are not going to give up on the third reconstruction that this nation needs to go through.
Right.
And, yeah, and we're going to claim our moment in history.
Yeah.
Going to claim it. And one day it will be written that we did not bow. We did not bow. Instead, we chose to stand.
Well, I can't say it any better than that. So thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks to everyone who's joined us.
Thank you so much. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Be well now.